The stars stretched across the viewport like diamonds scattered on black silk. Admiral Sarah Chen stood with her hands clasped behind her back, watching the endless dance of distant suns. She had seen this view 1,000 times, but tonight it felt different. Tonight it felt like watching a storm gather on a far horizon. The bridge of the Human Defense Station Vigilance hummed with quiet efficiency. Officers moved between their stations with practiced ease. Screens flickered with data streams from across human space. Everything looked normal. Everything felt wrong. Sarah Chen had commanded this station for 8 years. In that time, she had watched humanity grow from nervous newcomers to respected members of the galactic community. 200 years ago, humans had discovered faster-than-light travel and stumbled into a galaxy already full of ancient civilizations. They had been welcomed, studied, and eventually accepted. The Galactic Council had been ruling the stars for 12,000 years. 47 different species sat in the Great Chamber on Centris Prime, making decisions that affected trillions of lives. Humanity had earned their seat at that table through patience, diplomacy, and careful respect for the old ways. And then there was the Pact of Silent Stars. Every species that joined the Council signed it. The treaty was simple in its words, but heavy in its meaning. No member would raise weapons against another. Disputes would be solved through words, not war. The Council would enforce peace through cooperation and mutual benefit. For 2 centuries, humanity had kept that promise. Even when provoked, even when tested, even when it hurt, the door to the bridge slid open. Commander James Park entered, his face tight with worry. He carried a data pad that glowed with urgent red markers. Sarah turned from the viewport and met his eyes. She already knew what he was going to say. They had lost another ship, another colony transport, another 17,000 human lives, gone into the dark between stars, never to return. That made 19 ships in the last 6 months. Over 300,000 people. Families, children, dreams cut short. The colony ship Morningstar had been traveling to New Terra, a fresh world where humans were building farms and cities under alien suns. The ship had been full of hope, full of people looking for a new start. Now it was just another name on a growing list of the lost. Sarah took the datapad. Her fingers moved across the screen, pulling up the last transmission from the Morningstar. Static. Then a voice, calm and cold, speaking in the clicking language of the Krell. The Krell hegemony, an ancient warrior culture that had conquered dozens of worlds before joining the Council. They were huge creatures covered in thick armor plates with 4 arms and eyes like burning coals. They had been members of the Council for 3,000 years. They knew the rules. They knew the Pact. They were breaking it anyway. Sarah closed the datapad and looked at Commander Park. His jaw was tight. His hands were fists. Around the bridge, other officers had stopped their work. They were listening. They were waiting. How many times could humanity turn the other cheek? How many deaths before patience became cowardice? But Sarah Chen had her orders. Follow the Pact. Trust the Council. Let diplomacy work. She activated the communication system and sent an urgent message to Earth. Another incident to report. Another plea for the Council to act. Another day of restraint while their people died. 3 days later, Ambassador Marcus Webb stood before the Galactic Council. The chamber was magnificent, a dome of crystal that showed the stars themselves, seats arranged in circles, rising up like an amphitheater, each one occupied by a different form of intelligent life. There were the graceful Ashani, beings of light that communicated through color changes, the massive Thurian, stone-like creatures that lived for thousands of years, the quick-minded Vexa, traders and information brokers who seemed to know everything before it happened. And there were the Krell, sitting in their section with cold arrogance, watching Marcus with barely concealed contempt. Marcus presented his evidence. Ship logs, witness accounts from vessels that had escaped, analysis of debris fields. The pattern was clear. The Krell were hunting human ships in neutral space, far from help, far from witnesses. The Council listened with polite attention. Questions were asked. Technical details were examined. The Krell representative, Commander Jakral, denied everything with a voice like grinding stones. Accidents happened in space. Perhaps human ships were simply poorly built. Perhaps humans should be more careful where they traveled. Marcus kept his voice steady. He spoke of justice, of the Pact, of the promise that no member would harm another. He asked for action. For sanctions. For protection, the council deliberated. Hours passed. Finally, the decision came down. They would launch an investigation. Form a committee, study the matter carefully. In the meantime, they issued a statement of concern. A stern warning that violations of the Pact would not be tolerated. Words, just words. No action, no consequences. Marcus Webb left the council chamber with rage burning in his chest. He understood now. The council was old. The council was comfortable. The council cared more about stability than justice. Humanity was new. Humanity was weak. Humanity could be sacrificed for the sake of peace. Back on Earth, the human government held emergency meetings. Military commanders argued for action. Politicians urged patience. Scientists analyzed their options. Everyone knew that breaking the Pact meant war. War against the Krell. Maybe war against the Council itself. Could humanity survive that? Could they win? The galaxy thought they knew the answer. Humans were clever, yes. Creative with technology. Good at making friends and building things. But warriors? No. Humanity had no great wars in their recent past. They had joined the galactic community as peaceful explorers. Their military was small, designed only for defense. The Krell knew this. That was why they hunted with such confidence. What the galaxy did not know was that humanity remembered. Deep in their history before the stars, humans had nearly destroyed themselves in terrible wars. They had learned the cost of violence. They had chosen peace not from weakness but from bitter experience. And when humanity chose peace, they had made plans. Just in case peace failed, Admiral Sarah Chen knew those plans. Every human commander did. They were called Directive Archon, a set of strategies and weapons that had been developed in secret over 2 centuries, hidden behind the friendly face of human diplomacy, prepared for the day when words would not be enough. That day was coming. Sarah could feel it in her bones. Then came Haven Colony. Haven was one of humanity's oldest settlements. 4.2 million people lived there, farming the rich soil of a world that reminded them of Earth. Children played in streets lined with trees brought from home. Old people sat on porches and watched sunsets that were just slightly more orange than the ones they remembered. It was a good life, a peaceful life. The attack came without warning. Krell warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel right above the colony. They did not send messages. They did not make demands. They simply opened fire. Orbital defense stations were destroyed in the first seconds. The colony's small patrol ships tried to fight back and were swatted aside like insects. Then the Krell turned their weapons on the planet itself. Cities burned. Farms were scorched into ash. Millions died in fire and smoke. Those who tried to flee were hunted down. The Krell were efficient. The Krell were thorough. Sarah Chen's fleet arrived 6 hours later. 6 hours too late. They found a world still smoking. Bodies floating in orbit, children's toys drifting among the debris. The Krell ships were already gone, leaving only destruction behind. Sarah stood on the bridge of her flagship and watched rescue teams search for survivors. There were not many. Haven Colony, home to 4.2 million souls, now held fewer than 10,000, and most of those were injured. Dying, Commander Park handed her another datapad. This one contained a message, a recording that the Krell had broadcast across human space. Commander Jukral's face filled the screen. His forearms spread wide in a gesture of mockery. Your softness is your extinction. Your peace is your weakness. The strong take what they want. The weak die. This is the way of the universe. Accept it. The message ended. Sarah Chen stood very still. Around her, the bridge was silent. Every human present had lost someone. Friends, family, loved ones who would never come home. The weight of those losses hung in the air like smoke. Sarah closed her eyes. She thought about the Pact, about patience, about turning the other cheek, about trusting the Council to do what was right. The Council had failed them. The Pact had failed them. Peace had failed them. Her communicator chimed. A message from Earth, encrypted, highest priority. Sarah opened it with steady hands. 3 words glowed on the screen. Execute Directive Archon. Sarah looked up at her crew, at Commander Park, at the officers who had served with honor and restraint for so long. She saw the anger in their eyes. The grief. The determination. They had given peace every chance. They had followed the rules while their people died. They had trusted in justice that never came. No more. Admiral Sarah Chen activated the fleet-wide communication system. Her voice was calm, cold, final. All ships, stand by to receive new orders. The Pact of Silent Stars is dissolved. We are no longer bound by its terms. Activate Directive Archon. May God have mercy on those who forced our hand. Across human space, fleets began to move. Ships that had been hidden for centuries powered up their engines. Weapon systems that had never been seen came online. Military installations that the galaxy thought were simple research stations transformed into war machines. Humanity had spent 200 years preparing for this moment. 200 years studying every species, learning their weaknesses, building weapons designed specifically to counter the threats they might one day face. They had hoped this day would never come. They had prayed for peace to hold. But hope and prayers were not enough against enemies who saw kindness as weakness. The galaxy was about to learn a lesson. Humanity did not love war, but when forced to fight, when given no other choice, when their patience was exhausted and their mercy rejected, humans were very, very good at it. The storm Sarah Chen had felt gathering on that distant horizon was about to break, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same. The news spread through the galaxy like wildfire. Humanity had withdrawn from the Pact of Silent Stars. After 2 centuries of peace, the humans were breaking their promise. The council chambers erupted in debate. Some species expressed concern. Others dismissed it as an emotional outburst. The humans would calm down. They would come crawling back. They always did. Commander Zherkrell laughed when he heard. He stood in the war room of his flagship, surrounded by his officers. The walls were covered with battle trophies from a dozen conquered worlds. The Krell had been warriors for 10,000 years. They knew war. They had mastered it. What could these soft humans possibly do? The Krell military was vast and ancient. They had ships that could crack planets, weapons that had ended civilizations, warriors bred for combat, trained from birth to fight and die with honor. The humans had merchant vessels and defense stations. They had never fought a real war. This would be over quickly. Zherkrell ordered his fleets to mobilize. If the humans wanted war, he would give them extinction. The galaxy would see what happened to species that forgot their place. The weak would learn to fear the strong once again. On Earth, Admiral Sarah Chen sat in a secure conference room deep beneath the Planetary Defense Headquarters. Around her sat the command staff of the Human Defense Initiative, generals, admirals, intelligence officers, the best minds humanity had to offer. On the screens that lined the walls, data flowed in real time. Ship movements, supply lines, enemy positions. The Krell were gathering their forces. They expected an easy victory. They had no idea what was coming. General Marcus Stone stood and activated a holographic display. It showed the border regions between human and Krell space. Red markers indicated Krell fleet concentrations. Blue markers showed human forces. The red outnumbered the blue by a significant margin. That is what the Krell can see, Stone said. His voice was rough from years of command. Now let me show you what they cannot. He pressed a button. The display changed. Suddenly there were hundreds more blue markers, ships rising from hidden positions throughout the galaxy, stations transforming from research facilities into weapons platforms, assets that had been concealed for generations waiting for this moment. For 2 centuries humanity had prepared. They had smiled and traded and made friends. But they had also remembered their history, the wars that had nearly destroyed Earth, the lessons learned in blood and fire. They had built a military designed not for conquest but for absolute defense. And when defending everything you love, there is no such thing as too much preparation. The hidden fleet was just the beginning. Humanity had studied every species in the Council. They had learned their tactics, their weaknesses, their fears. The Krell relied on heavy armor and brute force. Humans had developed weapons that ignored armor, that struck at soft tissues, that turned strength into liability. Sarah Chen looked around the table. Every face was grim. Every eye was hard. These were not people who wanted war. They were people who had tried everything else first. They had exhausted every option for peace. Now they would do what was necessary. She stood and addressed the room. Her voice was clear and cold. We did not choose this. We gave the Council every chance to stop the Krell. We followed the rules while our people died. We trusted in justice that never came. History will remember that we tried, but history will also remember what happens to those who mistake patience for weakness. The room was silent. Then Commander Park spoke. He had lost his sister on Haven Colony. His voice shook with controlled fury. "What are our orders, Admiral?" Sarah looked at the display. At the red markers representing Krell fleets. At the blue markers showing human forces. At the vast distance of space between them. Soon that distance would be filled with fire and death. Ships would burn. Lives would end. The galaxy would be forever changed. But there was no other choice. The Krell had made certain of that. "Execute Operation Broken Chain," Sarah said. "All assets are now weapons-free. Rules of engagement are simple. Any Krell military target is fair game. Civilian populations are off-limits. We are not like them. We remember our humanity even in war." She paused, then added in a voice like ice, "But show them no mercy in battle. They asked for this. They will receive it in full measure." The orders went out across human space. Fleets that had been waiting for decades moved to their positions. Ships that looked like cargo haulers deployed weapons that had never been seen. Stations that appeared peaceful revealed their true nature. Humanity had prepared for this war. Now they would fight it. The first engagement came at Threshold Station, a trade hub on the edge of human territory. The Krell sent a battle group, 3 heavy cruisers, 12 destroyers, and a swarm of fighter craft. It was a standard Krell attack formation. Overwhelming force applied directly. Simple, brutal, effective. The Krell commander expected to find a lightly defended commercial station, perhaps a few patrol ships, easy prey. Instead, they found a fortress. Threshold Station had been designed as a defensive platform from the very beginning. Its innocent exterior hid armor plating that could withstand planetary bombardment. Its docking bays concealed launch tubes for hunter-killer missiles. Its power core could charge weapons that the Krell had never imagined. When the Krell fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel, they were greeted not with fear but with fire. The station opened up with everything it had. Rail guns that fired projectiles at a fraction of light speed, missiles that could think for themselves, hunting targets with artificial intelligence, energy weapons that carved through Krell armor like paper. The barrage was precise, calculated, devastating. The Krell cruisers tried to return fire. Their heavy plasma cannons lit up the void. But their weapons were designed for ship-to-ship combat at close range. The human station fought from a distance using speed and precision instead of brute strength. The Krell could not close fast enough, could not land their blows, could not understand how they were losing. Then the human fleet arrived. They came in fast and hard, dropping out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. Sleek ships that looked nothing like the bulky cargo haulers the galaxy knew. These were predators, built for speed, armed for killing, and they moved like a school of fish, coordinating with a precision that seemed impossible. The Krell formation broke as human ships tore through it. Missiles found weak points in armor. Railgun rounds punched through shields. Energy weapons burned through vital systems. The Krell tried to fight back, but their weapons could not track targets that moved so fast. Their tactics could not counter enemies that refused to stay still. In 4 hours, it was over. 2 Krell cruisers destroyed, 1 captured and boarded, 8 destroyers gone, the rest fled, limping back to Krell space with their survivors. The Krell had lost 60% of their attack force. The humans had lost 3 ships and suffered minor damage to the station. Admiral Sarah Chen watched the battle from her command center. When the last Krell ship jumped away, she allowed herself a small nod. Then she ordered the footage broadcast to every corner of the galaxy. The galaxy needed to see this. They needed to understand. Humanity was not bluffing. They were not throwing a tantrum. They had been preparing for war while others assumed they were weak. And now, finally, the mask was off. The broadcast reached the Galactic Council within hours. The Great Chamber, usually full of debate and discussion, fell silent as they watched the battle. They saw human weapons they had never known existed. They saw tactics that turned Krell strength into weakness. They saw a species they thought they understood revealing a completely different nature. The Ashani representative, a being of pure light named Loomis, spoke first. Its colors flickered with shock and concern. How long have they been preparing for this? How much have they hidden from us? No one had an answer. The Thurian elder, ancient beyond measure, rumbled in its deep voice. We assumed their peaceful nature was their entire nature. We forgot that any species capable of reaching the stars has known conflict. The humans did not forget. They simply chose peace until peace was no longer possible. Commander Jakral watched the broadcast from his flagship. His forearms trembled with rage. This should not be possible. The humans were merchants, scientists, diplomats. They were not warriors. They could not be this dangerous. But the evidence was there on the screen. His ships burning, his warriors dying, his proud fleet broken and fleeing. The humans had not just won. They had dominated, made it look easy. Shakral's second-in-command, a scarred veteran named Korath, spoke carefully. "Commander, perhaps we should reconsider. The humans are stronger than we thought. We could negotiate, find a peaceful solution." Shakral turned on him with fury. "We are Krell. We do not negotiate from weakness. We do not flee from prey. Mobilize the main fleet, all of it. We will crush these humans and remind the galaxy why they should fear us." Korath bowed his head, but he wondered if his commander understood what they were truly facing. The humans at Threshold Station had not fought with rage or passion. They had fought with cold calculation, like surgeons removing a tumor, like mathematicians solving an equation, like engineers fixing a problem that was more frightening than any battle cry. Across the galaxy, other species watched and took notes. The Vexa Consortium, traders and information brokers, realized too late that they had made a terrible mistake. They had been selling human location data to the Krell, making profit from both sides of the conflict. Now they understood that the humans would not forget, would not forgive, would come for them when the Krell were dealt with. The Vexa High Council held an emergency meeting. They discussed their options. They could try to hide, try to negotiate, try to pretend they had not been involved. But they had dealt with humans for 2 centuries. They knew how humans thought, how humans remembered, how humans kept records of everything. The humans would find the evidence, would trace the transactions, would know exactly who had sold their people's lives for profit. And then the humans would come calling with demands that could not be refused. On Earth, Sarah Chen received reports from intelligence. The Krell were gathering their full might. Every available ship, every warrior. They were preparing for total war. They thought numbers would win. They thought their ancient pride would carry them through. They were wrong. Sarah activated a secure channel to all human military commanders. Her face appeared on screens across human space, in stations orbiting Earth, on ships patrolling the frontier, in secret bases hidden in asteroid fields. Everywhere humans prepared for war, they stopped to listen. "The Krell are coming in force," she said. "They think they can overwhelm us with numbers. They think their warrior spirit will prevail. They are about to learn that spirit without wisdom is just noise, that courage without strategy is just waste, that honor without victory is just a pretty way to describe failure." She paused, letting her words sink in. Then she continued. "We gave them peace. They chose war. We gave them mercy. They chose cruelty. We gave them every chance to stop. They chose to continue. Now we will show them what humanity truly is, not the merchants they traded with, not the diplomats they dismissed, but the survivors who clawed their way up from caves to conquer the stars." Her eyes were hard as diamonds, cold as deep space, final as death itself. "Prepare for Operation Iron Storm. Every weapon we have built, every strategy we have planned, every tactic we have practiced. Now is the time. Show them why we chose peace. Show them why that was their only hope. Show them what happens when humanity stops trying to be better and simply becomes efficient." The transmission ended. Across human space, commanders nodded. Crews prepared their ships. Soldiers checked their weapons. Scientists armed their most terrible creations. Everyone knew what was coming. Everyone knew what it would cost. But they also knew it was necessary. The Krell wanted war. Humanity would give them exactly what they asked for. And when it was over, the galaxy would never again mistake human patience for human weakness. Never again assume that the gentle hand could not become an iron fist when required. The storm Sarah Chen had felt gathering was about to break with full fury. And in its wake, the galaxy would be forever changed. Operation Iron Storm began at dawn across a dozen worlds. Human fleets moved with perfect synchronization, striking Krell military installations simultaneously. The attacks came so fast that Krell commanders did not realize they were under coordinated assault until it was too late. At the Krell fortress world of Drakkar Prime, human ships appeared in the system without warning. They had traveled through rarely used hyperspace lanes, paths the Krell did not know existed, paths that humanity had been mapping for 2 centuries while pretending to be simple explorers. The Drakkar Prime Defense Fleet scrambled to respond. 50 warships, battle-hardened and ready. They moved to intercept, confident in their strength. Then the human ships did something the Krell had never seen before. They split into groups so small they seemed suicidal. Individual ships diving at the Krell formation from dozens of angles. The Krell thought it was desperation. They were wrong. It was strategy. Human fighters were not piloted by warriors seeking glory. They were controlled by artificial intelligence, systems that had been trained on millions of simulated battles, systems that learned from every mistake, systems that did not feel fear or anger or pride. They simply calculated the most efficient way to destroy their targets and executed those calculations perfectly. The Krell ships fired wildly, trying to track targets that moved in patterns their gunners could not predict. Human vessels dodged between plasma bolts using the void itself as cover. They struck at weak points in Krell armor, at exposed engine ports, at sensor arrays. Each shot was perfect. Each attack was surgical. Within an hour, half the Krell defense fleet was destroyed. The rest fled toward the planet, seeking the protection of ground-based weapons. The humans did not pursue immediately. Instead, they deployed something new. Something the Krell had never encountered: automated hunter-killer drones. Thousands of them, pouring from human cargo vessels like angry insects. Each one was small, fast, and deadly. Each one carried enough explosive power to cripple a battleship if it struck the right spot. And each one had been programmed with detailed knowledge of Krell ship designs, learned through 2 centuries of careful observation. The drones swarmed the remaining Krell vessels. Point defense systems could not track them all. Energy shields overloaded trying to stop the onslaught. One by one, the proud Krell warships went dark, their hulls breached, their crews dead or dying. On the surface of Drakkar Prime, Krell commanders watched in horror as their orbital defenses fell. They sent distress calls throughout Krell space. They begged for reinforcements. They asked how this was possible. The answer was simple. Humanity had been studying the Krell since their first meeting, learning their tactics, understanding their psychology, preparing for the day when words would not be enough. The Krell had grown comfortable, complacent. They had forgotten that every species that reaches the stars has known war, that survivors remember lessons written in blood. The same story played out across Krell space. At the mining colony of Forge Station, human ships destroyed ore processing facilities that fed the Krell war machine. At the shipyards of Karth, human missiles turned construction bays into fields of debris. At communication relays, human cyber weapons infiltrated networks and shut down coordination between Krell fleets. The Krell military machine, ancient and vast, began to break apart. Not because humans had more ships, not because humans had stronger weapons, but because humans fought smarter. They struck at supply lines, at infrastructure, at the foundation that supported Krell power. They did not just want to win battles, they wanted to make continued war impossible. Commander Jakral stood in his war room, watching reports flood in from across his territory, loss after loss, defeat after defeat. His officers stood silent, not knowing what to say. The proud Krell warrior culture had no words for what was happening. They understood glorious death in battle. They understood honorable defeat by a worthy foe. But this was not a battle, this was extermination. The humans are demons, one young officer whispered. They fight without honor, without courage. They hide behind machines and strike from the shadows. Jakral turned on him with fury. They fight to win. That is all that matters. Honor means nothing if you are dead. He swept his arm across the holographic display, scattering the markers that represented his dying fleets. We thought them weak because they chose peace. We thought them foolish because they talked instead of fought. But they were studying us, learning us, preparing to destroy us. Korath, his second-in-command, spoke carefully. Commander, we could surrender, negotiate. The humans have made their point. Perhaps they would accept peace. Jakral looked at him with something that might have been despair. They gave us peace. We responded with genocide. They offered us mercy. We responded with mockery. Why would they stop now? We showed them what we are. Now they are showing us what they can be. As the Krell struggled to respond, humanity launched the next phase of Operation Iron Storm. Psychological warfare. Human ships began broadcasting messages throughout Krell space. Messages in the Krell language delivered in voices that were calm and cold as ice. You called us weak. You killed our innocence. You mocked our peace. Now you learn the truth. We chose peace because we knew war. We knew what we were capable of. We knew what would happen if we let ourselves become what you are. But you would not stop. You would not listen. So now we show you. We show you why the wise fear the patient, why the strong should respect the gentle, why peace is not weakness, but wisdom. The broadcast continued day and night. They showed footage of human victories, of Krell ships burning, of proud warriors fleeing in terror. They showed the math, the cold calculations. How many Krell ships destroyed for each human loss? How many resources consumed? How much time before the Krell could no longer sustain their military? The Krell had always believed in their superiority, in their destiny to rule. These broadcasts shattered that belief. They showed the Krell something worse than defeat. They showed them irrelevance. They showed them that their ancient warrior culture meant nothing against an enemy that fought with pure efficiency. Young Krell warriors began to question their leaders. If the humans could do this, what had all their training been for? What was the value of honor if it led to extinction? Some deserted. Others refused orders. The proud Krell military structure began to crack from within. Meanwhile, humanity turned its attention to the Vexa consortium, the traitors who had sold human lives for profit. Human intelligence services had traced every transaction. They knew which Vexa executives had approved the sales. They knew which accounts held the blood money. And they came collecting. Human cyber warriors infiltrated Vexa networks with ease. The Vexa prided themselves on their information security. But humans had invented digital warfare. They had written the first computer viruses back on Earth, centuries before reaching the stars. The Vexa systems might as well have been locked with paper doors. Every financial record was copied. Every communication was saved. Every secret the Vexa consortium had ever kept was now in human hands. Then the accounts were frozen. Billions in credits locked away instantly. The Vexa economy, built on trade and information, seized up like a heart attack. The Vexa High Council received a message. Simple, direct, brutal in its clarity. 3 executives would be extradited to Earth to face trial for crimes against humanity. All assets involved in the sale of human data would be forfeit. The Vexa would pay reparations to the families of every human killed. And they would do it now. Or humanity would share the Vexa's secrets with every enemy they had ever made. The Vexa capitulated within hours. They had no choice. Humanity held all the cards. The 3 executives were handed over. The assets were transferred. The reparations began. And the Vexa learned the same lesson the Krell were learning. Do not make an enemy of a species that remembers everything and plans for centuries. The Galactic Council watched all of this with growing alarm. They called emergency sessions. They debated responses. Some species wanted to intervene, to force both sides to negotiate. Others argued for staying out of it entirely. The humans had not attacked anyone except those who had harmed them. They had kept their promise to avoid civilian casualties. They were, in their own way, still following the spirit of the Pact even while violating its letter. But the real terror came from understanding. The Council had thought they knew humanity. 2 centuries of interaction. 2 centuries of trade and diplomacy, 2 centuries of peace. And in all that time, humanity had been hiding their true nature, not from malice, but from mercy. They had given the galaxy a chance to do the right thing. The galaxy had failed that test. Ambassador Marcus Webb appeared before the Council one final time. He looked different now, harder, colder. The diplomat who had pleaded for justice was gone. In his place stood a representative of a species at war. He spoke without preamble. Humanity came to you for help. You offered words. We asked for justice. You offered delays. We begged for protection. You offered sympathy. So we have learned a lesson. We have learned that in this galaxy, justice belongs to those with the strength to enforce it. Peace belongs to those who can make war. and mercy is only given to those who do not need it. He looked around the chamber at the assembled species. Some met his eyes. Most looked away. The Council has failed in its most basic duty, to protect its members, to enforce the Pact, to ensure that strength serves justice, not replaces it. So humanity will do what you should have done. We will end this threat. We will make the Krell unable to harm anyone ever again, and we will do it in a way that ensures no one else mistakes our patience for weakness. The Thurian elder rumbled a question. What will you do when the war ends? Will you rejoin the Council? Will you help us rebuild? Marcus looked at the ancient being. That depends on you. The Pact failed because it had no teeth. Words without consequences are just noise. If you want humanity back, you will need to prove that things will be different. That the next time someone attacks a council member, there will be real punishment, real action, real justice. Until then, humanity will trust in our own strength. He turned and left the chamber. Behind him, the council erupted in debate. Some species were angry at the implied insult. Others were thoughtful. A few were frightened, because Marcus Webb had said something true, something that could not be ignored. The Pact had failed, and if it could fail for humanity, it could fail for anyone. Back in human space, Admiral Sarah Chen watched the war's progress. The Krell were broken, their fleets scattered, their economy collapsing, but they had not surrendered. Pride kept them fighting even when victory was impossible. Honor demanded they die rather than submit. Sarah understood pride. She respected honor, but she also understood that sometimes mercy required cruelty, that sometimes saving lives meant breaking spirits. The Krell would never accept defeat as long as they believed their warrior culture had value. So humanity would have to show them the truth, would have to prove beyond any doubt that their way of thinking was not just wrong, but obsolete. She gave the order for the final phase. Operation Endgame. Human forces would blockade the Krell homeworlds, not to bombard them, not to invade them, simply to isolate them completely. No trade, no travel, no communication with the outside galaxy. The Krell would be left alone with their pride and their honor and their warrior culture, and they would watch as the galaxy moved on without them. It was a mercy in its way. Humanity could have destroyed the Krell completely, could have reduced their worlds to ash, could have erased them from history, but that would make humanity no better than the monsters they were fighting. So instead, they chose a different path. Isolation, irrelevance, a slow death of culture rather than a quick death of bodies. The blockade began. Human ships surrounded every Krell world. Autonomous defense platforms made any attempt to leave suicide. Communication jammers cut the Krell off from the galactic networks. Within weeks, the proud warrior race found themselves alone, trapped, forgotten by a galaxy that had moved on. Commander Jakral stood on the surface of his home world, looking up at the stars he could no longer reach. His empire was gone. His fleets were destroyed. His people were prisoners in their own system. And it had happened so fast. 8 months. 8 months from the first attack on Haven Colony to complete defeat. He had thought humans were weak. He had thought their peace was cowardice. He had learned the terrible truth. Humans were not weak. They were patient. They were not cowards. They were prepared. And when they finally acted, they did not do it halfway. They did it with the full force of 2 centuries of planning and preparation. The war was over. Humanity had won, but more importantly, they had sent a message to the entire galaxy, a message that would echo for thousands of years. Do not mistake patience for weakness. Do not confuse peace with inability. Because humanity chooses peace, they choose it every day. But when that choice is taken away, when all options are exhausted, when mercy is rejected and kindness is repaid with cruelty, then humanity will show you what they truly are. Survivors who are very, very good at making sure threats never rise again. The aftermath of war settled across the galaxy like dust after an explosion. The Krell hegemony, once a unified empire spanning dozens of star systems, had fractured into 12 squabbling remnant states. Each claimed to be the true heir of Krell glory. Each blamed the others for their defeat. None had the strength to reunify. Commander Jakral stood in chains before a human tribunal. The trial was held on neutral ground, broadcast live to every world in the galaxy. Humans did not hide their justice. They wanted everyone to see, to understand. To remember, the charges were read in calm, measured voices. Genocide, war crimes, Crimes against sentient beings. The evidence was overwhelming. Footage from Haven Colony, testimony from survivors, data logs from Krell ships showing deliberate targeting of civilians. Every fact documented, every crime proven beyond doubt. Krell said nothing in his defense. What could he say? He had ordered the attacks. He had laughed at human deaths. He had believed that might made right. The humans proved him wrong in the most brutal way possible. Now he stood as an example, a warning to anyone else who might think the same way. The sentence was life imprisonment. No execution. No martyrdom. Just a long, slow fade into obscurity. Krell would spend his remaining years in a human prison, watching through windows as the galaxy moved forward without him. It was perhaps crueler than death. And it was exactly what he deserved. The Vexa Consortium paid reparations that nearly bankrupted their government. Every family that had lost someone received compensation. Every colony that had been threatened received protection guarantees. The 3 Vexa executives who had sold human data were found guilty of conspiracy to commit genocide. They too faced long prison sentences, but money and prison time were not enough. Humanity demanded more. The Vexa intelligence networks, once the most sophisticated in the galaxy, were dismantled completely. Their data vaults were opened and everything was shared with the galaxy. Secrets that had been kept for centuries were revealed. Deals made in darkness were brought into light. Dozens of governments fell as their corruption was exposed. Trade networks collapsed when their fraud was proven. The Vexa had thought information was power. Humans showed them that information without trust was just noise. 23 species of the Galactic Council issued formal apologies to humanity. Public statements acknowledging their failure. Admitting they had valued peace over justice. Confessing they had let politics matter more than principles. 8 governments collapsed from the shame of it. Leaders who had done nothing while humans died were voted out or forced to resign. The Thurian elder, ancient and wise, led the council in a ceremony of remembrance. They gathered in the great chamber under the crystal dome that showed the stars. And they spoke the names. Every human who had died. Every innocent lost to Krell aggression. 300,000 names. It took 3 days to read them all. Humanity watched. Some wept. Others remained stone-faced. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the human section of the chamber. Her uniform perfect, her face showing nothing. Inside, her heart was breaking. But she would not give the galaxy her tears. They had not earned them. When the ceremony ended, Ambassador Marcus Webb stepped forward. He carried a document, the Accord of Terra, a new set of laws for the galaxy, not a treaty this time, not a pact based on trust, but a code with real enforcement. The Accord had teeth. If one member attacked another, there would be immediate sanctions. Military response. Economic isolation. No more committees. No more investigations that went nowhere. No more words without action. Justice would be swift. Punishment would be certain. And humanity would help enforce it. The council debated for weeks. Some species objected to the harsh terms. Others worried about human dominance. But most understood the truth. The old ways had failed. The Pact of Silent Stars had been beautiful in theory but worthless in practice. The Accord of Terra might be harsher, but it would work. In the end, 42 species signed. Only 5 refused. 3 were isolated fringe worlds that rarely interacted with the greater galaxy anyway. 1 was a pacifist society that could not accept any military alliance. And 1 was a proud warrior culture that could not stomach submitting to human authority. Humanity did not force them, did not threaten them, simply made it clear that the Accord's protections only applied to signatories. If you wanted to be safe, you joined. If you wanted to be alone, that was your choice. But you would truly be alone. The human military did not stand down. Admiral Chen's fleets remained on high alert. Ships continued to patrol. Stations remained armed. The weapons that had won the war stayed ready. Some species complained about this, called it aggressive, said humanity was becoming what they had fought against. Marcus Webb addressed those concerns directly. We learned a lesson at terrible cost. Peace is not maintained by good intentions. It is maintained by the certain knowledge that breaking it will be punished. Our military remains strong not because we want war, but because we want peace. Real peace. The kind where everyone knows the rules and everyone follows them because the consequences of breaking them are too severe. He paused, then added with ice in his voice, We tried it the other way. We trusted in the Council to protect us. We believed that being good would keep us safe. 4.2 million of our people died learning that lesson. We will not forget it. We will not let you forget it either. The galaxy accepted this. They had no choice. Humanity had proven they could enforce their will. More importantly, they had proven they would only use that power for defense and justice. They had not conquered anyone, had not demanded tribute, had not built an empire. They had simply made it impossible for anyone to prey on the weak again. 10 years passed. New species entered the galactic community and heard the story of the Krell War. It became a legend. A cautionary tale. Young beings across the galaxy learned about humanity, about the patient species that had given peace every chance, about the prepared species that had planned for the worst while hoping for the best, about the survivors who had shown mercy when they could have shown only rage. The phrase became common in galactic politics. Do not anger the humans, not because they were quick to rage, but because they were slow to forgive. Not because they loved violence, but because they were terrifyingly efficient at it when necessary. Not because they sought dominance, but because they would never again trust others to protect them. Human colonies flourished under the new order. Trade increased. Cultural exchanges expanded. New settlements were founded on worlds that had once been too dangerous to risk. The Accord of Terra had brought real peace, the kind that lasted because everyone understood the alternative. The Krell remnant states struggled in their isolation. Some adapted, learned new ways, abandoned their warrior culture for something more sustainable. Others clung to the old pride, the old honor. They told stories of past glory and blamed others for their fall. Slowly, painfully, they were learning what humanity had tried to teach them. That strength without wisdom is just waste. That pride without victory is just delusion. That the galaxy moves on whether you change or not. Sarah Chen retired from active service on the 20th anniversary of the Battle of Threshold Station. She was 58 years old. She had spent half her life preparing for war, and the other half either fighting it or dealing with its aftermath. She was tired, bone-tired, soul-tired, the kind of tired that comes from carrying the weight of millions of deaths. She returned to Earth, to the small town where she had grown up, to the house her grandmother had built with her own hands. She sat on the porch and watched the sunset, orange and gold and red painting the sky, the same colors that had painted Haven Colony as it burned. Commander James Park came to visit. He had lost his sister on Haven. He had fought through the entire war. Now he served as an instructor at the military academy, teaching the next generation of officers, teaching them the lessons learned in blood and fire. They sat together in comfortable silence. Two old warriors who had seen too much, done too much, survived when so many others had not. Finally, James spoke. Do you think it was worth it? All of it? The war? The deaths? The changes we forced on the galaxy? Sarah was quiet for a long time. Then she said, we gave peace a chance. We gave it everything we had. We followed the rules. We trusted in justice. We believed the galaxy would do the right thing. And when all of that failed, when our people died because we were patient, we did what we had to do, not what we wanted. What we had to. She turned to look at him. Her eyes were old, tired, but still sharp, still clear, still seeing everything. Was it worth it? I do not know. But I know this. It was necessary. And I know that the peace we have now, the real peace, would not exist without it. The galaxy learned that mercy requires strength, that justice requires action, that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of consequences for those who break it. James nodded slowly. That is what I tell the cadets. I tell them about Haven, about the pact that failed, about the moment when we stopped asking permission to defend ourselves. I tell them that humanity is not a warrior race. We are survivors. And we remember, Sarah smiled. It was a sad smile, a smile that had seen too much darkness but still found some light. That is good. They need to understand. We did not fight because we loved war. We fought because we loved peace and were willing to defend it. That is the lesson. Not that might makes right, but that right without might is just hope, and hope is not enough. They watched the sunset together, orange fading to purple, purple fading to black, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, the same stars that humanity had reached so long ago, the same stars that had watched humanity grow from fearful newcomers to confident guardians. Somewhere out there, the Krell sat in their isolation and remembered their defeat. The Vexa struggled to rebuild trust they had destroyed. The Council governed under new rules that actually worked, and humanity stood watch, making sure that the peace they had paid for in blood would last. Not because they wanted to rule. Not because they sought glory, but because they had learned a lesson that could not be unlearned. That patience has limits, that mercy must be earned, that peace requires both the desire for it and the strength to maintain it. The galaxy had mistaken humanity's patience for weakness, had seen their diplomacy as fear, had thought that because humans chose peace they could not choose war. They learned differently at terrible cost, not just to them but to humanity as well. Because winning a war does not mean escaping its scars. Sarah Chen carried those scars. Every human commander did. Every soldier who had fought. Every civilian who had survived. They remembered what they had lost. What they had been forced to become. What they had paid to ensure their children would grow up in a galaxy where might did not make right. Sarah stood and walked to the edge of her porch. She looked up at the stars. At the vast darkness between them. At the tiny lights that marked other worlds, other species, other civilizations trying to survive in an indifferent universe. She thought about the Pact of Silent Stars, about the dream of peace through cooperation, about how beautiful that dream had been, how necessary, how ultimately fragile when some species refused to honor it. She thought about the Accord of Terra, about the harsh reality of peace through strength, about how it worked because everyone understood the consequences, about how it would last as long as humanity remained vigilant, and she thought about the future, about young humans growing up in a galaxy that respected them, about colonies that could expand without fear, about the certainty that if someone threatened humanity again, the response would be immediate and overwhelming. Was it worth it? Was the cost worth the result? Sarah Chen did not know. She suspected she would never know. All she knew for certain was that she had done what she believed was right. What was necessary? What gave her people a chance at a future where patience would not be punished, where peace would not be mistaken for weakness, where humanity could be what they wanted to be, knowing that the galaxy would respect that choice. She turned back to James. He had fallen asleep in his chair, his face peaceful for once. She smiled and covered him with a blanket. Let him rest. They had all earned their rest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, new tests of the peace they had built. But tonight Sarah Chen could stand on her porch and watch the stars in silence, could remember the fallen, could honor the sacrifice, could carry the weight of what had been done so that others would not have to. And somewhere out there, across the vast distances of space, the galaxy slept a little more soundly. Because they knew that humanity watched, humanity remembered. And humanity would never again wait for permission to defend their own. 50 years after the Krell War, the galaxy had changed in ways both visible and invisible. The Accord of Terra had become the foundation of galactic law. New species entering the community learned about it before they were even allowed to visit council space. The message was clear and simple. In this galaxy, peace is protected by those willing to enforce it. Human colonies spread across 200 star systems. Billions of people living under alien suns, building homes and raising children in safety. The old fear was gone. The worry that some aggressive species might see them as prey. Everyone knew now. Attacking humanity meant swift and total retaliation. The Krell had learned that lesson. The galaxy remembered it. On Earth, in the gardens of the Human Defense Headquarters, a memorial stood. A simple black wall inscribed with 300,000 names. The fallen of Haven Colony and the missing from the colony ships. Every year on the anniversary of the attack, people gathered there. They placed flowers. They spoke names. They remembered. Admiral Sarah Chen had been dead for 15 years, but her words were carved into the base of the memorial. We gave peace a chance. We gave it everything. Never again will we wait for permission to defend our own. Simple words. True words. Words that defined the new humanity. Commander James Park, now elderly and walking with a cane, came to the memorial every year. He brought his grandchildren, told them stories about the war, about Haven, about the moment when humanity stopped asking and started acting. The children listened with wide eyes. They had grown up in a different galaxy, one where humanity was respected, feared, safe. They could not imagine what it had been like before. when humans were the newcomers, the weak ones, the species that others thought they could bully or ignore. That galaxy seemed like ancient history to them. But James made sure they understood, made sure they knew the cost of the peace they enjoyed. The Krell had changed too. The remnant states had slowly, painfully begun to rebuild. Some had abandoned their warrior culture entirely. They became traders, scholars, artists. They found new ways to be proud of themselves that did not involve conquering others. These groups occasionally petitioned to rejoin the galactic community. Some were allowed back after careful observation and strict conditions. Others clung to the old ways. They still told stories of past glory, still believed that the warrior path was the only honorable one. These groups remained isolated, forgotten by a galaxy that had moved on. They were not dangerous anymore, just sad. Relics of a time when strength was measured only in the ability to destroy. Commander Jakral died in human custody after 37 years of imprisonment. He never apologized, never showed remorse. He died believing he had done nothing wrong, that the humans had simply gotten lucky, that if the war could be fought again, the Krell would win. He died wrong, and alone, and unmourned even by his own people who had learned to despise what he represented. The Vexa Consortium had rebuilt their economy, but they never regained their position as the galaxy's information brokers. Trust once lost was hard to recover. They paid their reparations faithfully. They followed all the new regulations. They cooperated with oversight. But everyone remembered what they had done, what they had sold, and no one ever fully trusted them again. In the Great Chamber of the Galactic Council, the seats were full. 63 species now. 23 new members who had joined in the decades since the war. They sat beneath the crystal dome and debated the issues of the day: trade agreements, environmental protections, cultural exchanges, the normal business of a galaxy at peace. But there was always one seat that commanded special attention: the human representative, currently a woman named Ambassador Elena Vasquez. She was young by council standards, only 45. But she carried herself with the confidence of someone who represented real power, not just military strength but moral authority earned through sacrifice. When humanity spoke, the council listened. Not out of fear, though fear was part of it, but out of respect. Humanity had proven they would do what needed to be done. They would not threaten or bluster. They would simply act, and their actions would be decisive. A dispute arose between two member species. The Quarren and the Silicates had been arguing for months over mining rights on a contested world. Words had turned to threats. Threats had turned to military buildups. Ships were gathering. War seemed inevitable. The council debated. Committees were formed. Studies were commissioned. The same old patterns that had failed before. Ambassador Vasquez watched for 2 weeks, giving diplomacy time to work, giving peace a chance. Finally, she stood and asked to speak. The chamber fell silent. When the human ambassador asked to speak, it meant something important was about to happen. Elena spoke in a calm, clear voice. The Accord of Terra is simple. Council members do not make war on each other. If you cannot resolve this dispute through negotiation, then it will be resolved through arbitration. Humanity offers to mediate. We will study the claims, examine the evidence, make a decision that is fair, and both sides will accept it, because the alternative is enforcement. And you do not want enforcement. The Quarren representative, a large amphibious being, started to object. Elena cut him off with a raised hand. We gave you 2 weeks to solve this yourselves. You chose to posture instead. You chose to threaten instead. You chose to waste time while your people prepared to die. So now you will accept help, whether you like it or not. Because this council learned a lesson 50 years ago. Peace requires action. Justice requires enforcement. And humanity will provide both. Both sides accepted mediation. They had no real choice. Human ships moved to the contested system to enforce the peace while negotiations continued. Within 2 months, an agreement was reached. It was not perfect. Neither side got everything they wanted, but it was fair, and more importantly, it prevented a war. This happened again and again. Humanity became the galaxy's peacekeepers, not because they wanted the job, but because they were the only ones willing to do what was necessary. To use force to prevent violence, to act decisively while others debated endlessly, to remember that peace without enforcement was just a pleasant dream that would end in nightmare. Some species resented this. called it human imperialism, said that humanity was becoming the tyrants they had fought against. But these critics were few and quiet, because everyone knew the truth. Humanity did not seek to rule. They sought only to protect, and they protected everyone equally, without favoritism or prejudice. A new species called the Kethran entered the galactic community. They were young, aggressive, full of confidence. They looked at the Council and saw old species set in their ways. They looked at the Accord and saw restrictions. They thought they could do what the Krell had tried, be the strong ones, take what they wanted, prove that might made right. They started small. Border violations, harassment of shipping, demands that could not be met. Testing, pushing, seeing how far they could go before someone stopped them. The Council issued warnings, formed committees. The Kethran ignored them. They had studied the old records. They knew how long the Council had debated before acting against the Krell. How many chances had been given, how much patience had been shown. They thought they had time. They were wrong. Humanity did not wait for the Council to act. The Accord gave them authority to respond to violations immediately. When Kethran ships attacked a trade convoy carrying colonists from 6 different species, the response was instant. Human warships appeared in Kethran space within hours. Not dozens, not hundreds, just 3 ships. But they were enough. The Kethran military was new, untested, built on pride and aggression. The human ships were veterans of a war the Kethran had only read about. The engagement lasted 20 minutes. The Kethran lost half their fleet. The human ships suffered minor damage to one shield generator. Then the humans broadcast a message. Simple, direct, final. The Krell learned this lesson at terrible cost. You can learn it cheaply. The Accord exists to protect all species. Violate it and face consequences. Immediately. Decisively, without mercy. You have one chance to comply. Stand down, pay reparations, submit to oversight. Or what just happened to your fleet will happen to everything you value. Choose now. The Kethran chose compliance. Within days, their government issued a formal apology, paid compensation to the victims' families, accepted council observers, signed the Accord without conditions. They had been taught the same lesson the Krell learned. But they learned it early, before pride led to genocide, before arrogance led to extinction. Some called this brutality. Others called it necessary. Humanity called it prevention. Better to stop aggression early, with minimal force, than to wait until only total war could end it. Better to show strength once than to have to prove it through endless conflicts. The galaxy learned, slowly, painfully. But they learned. War between council members became unthinkable, not because everyone loved each other, but because everyone understood the cost, the swift, certain, overwhelming cost that would follow any violation. Ambassador Vasquez returned to Earth after 10 years of service. She was tired. The job of enforcing peace was harder than fighting a war. In war, you knew who your enemies were. In peace, you had to judge every situation, decide when to act and when to wait. Balance justice with mercy. Maintain strength without becoming the monster. She visited the memorial, stood before the black wall with its 300,000 names, placed her hand against the cold stone. These people had died so that others would not have to, had paid the price of teaching the galaxy a lesson it should have already known. That peace without strength is just hope, and hope is not enough. An old man approached. He walked slowly, leaning on his cane. Commander James Park, ancient now, nearly 90, but still sharp, still clear, still carrying the memories of that terrible war. They stood together in silence. 2 generations, one that had fought the war, one that had maintained the peace it bought. Different experiences, same mission. Finally, James spoke. His voice was thin but steady. Do you think Sarah would be proud of what we have built, of what we have become? Elena considered this. She had studied Sarah Chen, read her writings, watched recordings of her speeches. She felt like she knew the woman even though they had never met. I think she would be satisfied, Elena said. Not proud, maybe, because there is no pride in what we had to do, but satisfied that it was necessary, that it worked, that her people are safe, that the peace she fought for has lasted. James nodded slowly. That is what she wanted. Not glory, not praise, just results. Just a galaxy where patience is not punished, where peace is not mistaken for weakness, where her people can live without fear. He paused, then added, and she wanted us to remember, to never forget what happened when we trusted others to protect us, to never again wait for permission to defend our own. Elena looked at the memorial, at the names carved in stone, at the flowers people had left, at the children playing nearby, safe and happy, not knowing the cost of their security. We remember, she said. Every diplomat, every commander, every human who serves the galaxy. We remember Haven. We remember the pact that failed. We remember what we had to become. And we make sure it never happens again. Not to us, not to anyone, James smiled. It was a sad smile, a smile that had seen too much, but also a smile that had seen things get better. That had watched a galaxy learn from its mistakes, that had lived long enough to see the purpose behind the sacrifice. Then we did it right, he said. Then it was worth it. Not the cost. The cost is never worth it. But the result. The galaxy we saved. The peace we built. The future we gave to children who will never know what we went through to secure it. That is worth remembering. They stood together as the sun set, as the stars began to appear. The same stars humanity had reached for so long ago. The same stars that now held human colonies. Human ships. Human guardians watching over a peace that had been paid for in blood. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Some species learned it by watching the Krell burn. Others learned it by watching the Kethrin submit. All of them learned the same truth. Humanity was not a warrior race. They were survivors, and they remembered. They remembered every slight, every death, every moment when peace failed and war became necessary. They carried those memories like scars. Let them shape policy and doctrine. Use them to ensure that history would not repeat. And because they remembered, the galaxy was safer. Because they prepared, peace was possible. Because they were willing to act, justice was real. Because they refused to forget, the lessons stayed learned. Humanity did not rule the galaxy. They had no desire to. They simply ensured that no one else would rule it through force. That might would not make right. That the strong would not prey on the weak. That peace would be protected by those willing to fight for it. It was not the future humanity had wanted. They had wanted the Pact of Silent Stars to work. Had wanted the Council to be enough. Had wanted peace to be possible through trust and cooperation alone. But that future had died with 4.2 million innocents on Haven Colony. The future they built instead was harsher. More vigilant, less trusting. But it worked. And in the end, that was what mattered. Not the dream of peace, but the reality of it. Not the hope for justice, but the enforcement of it. Not the wish for safety, but the guarantee of it. Sarah Chen had said it best all those decades ago. We gave peace a chance. We gave it everything. Never again will we wait for permission to defend our own. Those words had become humanity's creed. Their promise. Their warning to anyone who might forget. The galaxy had mistaken humanity's patience for weakness. Their diplomacy for fear. Their choice of peace for inability to wage war. They learned differently. Learned that humans did not love conflict. But when forced to fight, when given no alternative, when their patience was exhausted and their mercy rejected, they were terrifyingly effective. And that was the true lesson. The one that echoed across the centuries. The one that kept the peace even when tempers flared and conflicts arose. The one that made the Accord of Terra work where the Pact of Silent Stars had failed. Humanity had shown the galaxy that peace was not just an ideal. It was a choice backed by preparation, by strength, by the certain knowledge that breaking it would bring swift and terrible consequences. Peace was not the absence of violence. It was the presence of those willing to prevent it. And so the galaxy learned to keep the peace, not because they wanted to, not because they loved their neighbors, but because they understood the alternative, because they remembered the Krell, because they knew that humanity watched, and remembered, and would act. It was not a perfect peace. No peace ever is, but it was real. It was lasting. It was protected. and it was bought at a price that humanity would never forget, and would never let the galaxy forget either. The stars shone down on Earth, on the memorial, on two people who represented everything humanity had become. James Park, who had fought in the war. Elena Vasquez, who maintained the peace it won. Different generations, different experiences, same understanding. Peace had failed once. The galaxy had watched. The Pact had shattered. Humanity had unleashed its rage. And from that terrible moment, a new order had been born. Not the one humanity wanted, but the one the galaxy needed, the one that actually worked. And as long as humanity remembered what led to that moment, as long as they carried the scars of Haven Colony and the lessons of the Krell War, the peace would hold. Not through hope, not through trust, but through the certain knowledge that breaking it would cost more than anyone was willing to pay. That was humanity's gift to the galaxy. Not empire, not conquest, not rule, just the guarantee that peace would be protected, that justice would be enforced, that the strong would not prey on the weak, that patience would not be punished, and in the end, that was enough.